Welcome to our webinar, a checklist for the ever-evolving employer-employee relationship. This presentation will last about 30 minutes, and a recording of the webinar will be available on the Wagner Law Group website very shortly. You can access previous webinars on the website as well. Let me introduce our speaker, David Gabor, a partner with the Wagner Law Group in the Boston office. Welcome, David.
Okay, I have the slides up, check. I have the monitor up, check. I have the audio up, check. Oh wait, I think the program began. Oops. Okay, it's not that kind of checklist. Let's go to page 3. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you all for attending the program today. We are here to discuss steps that employers can take to mitigate risk while promoting employee engagement. This must be done in a manner that is user-friendly to your business and consistent with all laws, rules, and regulations. And basically what's happened during my years of working as a litigator and also as a mediator trying to resolve disputes, I have seen things that employers have done more than one time that are avoidable. The first is when they make assumptions. Well, we've always done it that way. It's fine. We can keep doing that. Or, oh, I'm sure legal checked on it or compliance checked on it. Paper versus reality. One of the problems I see in paper versus reality is that there might be a job description that says that an employee, let's say Tara, is doing X, Y, and Z, but in fact she's doing 1, 2, and 3. So oftentimes there's a disconnect between what the paper reflects a person's doing and what a person really is doing. Another one is the right hand versus the left hand. One person takes a certain approach and another person doesn't know about it in the company, and they really aren't communicating well enough with each other. Pressure. So many companies are under intense pressure to lower their costs, reduce budgets, save some money here so that the bottom line is what they need it to be. They're reporting to senior management, they're reporting to board of directors, shareholders, what have you. They're under huge pressure, and as a result, people sometimes are overwhelmed or overburdened. A lack of consistency. What oftentimes happens is we don't do it the same way twice, and that exposes companies to claims such as a claim for unequal pay, disparate treatment, employee engagement could be hurt by that. And finally, turnover. Whether it's a person who goes out on leave. Sometimes people don't plan something like a car accident, and it happens all of a sudden, and then we have to figure out what's on that person's desk. So we have a person, let's say Megan, who is a great worker and brilliant, hard, tenacious, but when you pick up where she left off on the desk, you're not quite sure what she's done, where she's left off, or if a person leaves the job and a new person comes in. Having something like a checklist on certain procedures that are being used by the company, number one, establishes protocol, and number two, it tells us where we've left off. Next slide, please. So every year, and I've done these programs now for several years, I like to talk about what the EEOC is doing. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is one place where people file. Many times cases are filed in court and not just in the agencies. And in 2014, more than 88,000 charges were filed with the EEOC. That's 88,000 separate claims of discrimination in employment. The majority, 38,000, were for retaliation. And retaliation claims are something that really ought to almost never happen. It still is, though. And that means that employers still are not doing enough to eliminate the risk or exposure to claims of retaliation. And as you can see, we still have race, sex, disability discrimination, and age discrimination in numbers that are far too large. Next slide, please. Another area of litigation comes in the compliance. And this could be an audit by the Department of Labor, by the Internal Revenue Service, by the state, by the people in OSHA, and a number of different agencies can conduct audits or investigations of companies. You also have private causes of action for wage and hour, things along those lines that are brought. And then there's the collective litigation, class action cases. Those are the ones that cost a company an arm and a leg. So even if you win a collective action, you still could be looking at legal fees of many hundreds of thousands of dollars to more than $1 million. So again, that's why we're here today, to talk about user-friendly ways to eliminate this risk. Why am I a proponent of checklists? First off, it's communication. It is a piece of paper that is used by more than one department of the company to make sure that we're taking the same steps. On each case, we don't miss a step. We're taking ownership. When you initial that you've done this work on this particular project, you're taking ownership over that, and your name's on that piece of paper now. So if you don't do the work and you initial it, you're in a world of trouble, but it creates accountability. We're defining the process. We're not being haphazard. We're going to have a similar process followed again and again and again. We're basically not looking to reinvent the wheel. We're looking to just get it right. When there's a leave of absence and a person leaves the job all of a sudden, and if someone comes in to pick up the work at her desk, you know where that person left off on that project because you've got the checklist right in front of you. It's a way to deal with the time pressure, because actually by having the checklist, you're doing it faster. You don't have to research what the steps are. You already have the steps in front of you. It also ensures there's a due diligence. There may be things you need to do. For example, get an update from council with respect to any changes in a state or a local law, rule, or regulations. And then you've got that continuity. By doing it the same way for more than one person, you're eliminating those claims of disparate treatment. A disparate treatment is where, let's say we've got 3 people, one person who's 50 and 2 people who are 30, and we do it the same way for the 2 people who are younger and differently for the person who's older. You can bet dollars to donuts that the person who's older is going to cry foul, and that's what we're looking to avoid. Let's go to slide 7. So when we build a checklist, what we're looking to do, number 1, is establish goals. What is the goal in this process? Let's say we're hiring somebody, or we're going to terminate somebody, or we're looking to do a promotion, or we want to make sure that we're up to speed on our training or compliance. What's your goal? Then once you have the goal, then you've got to create a process. What's the process that we're going to use? What are the steps? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You know, and we've got this written down, and it's a defined process. Let's do a quick check to make sure that the process we're using doesn't violate any laws. And keep in mind that we don't just have federal laws, and we don't just have the laws where you're located. If you're an organization and you've got people in multiple states or different towns or cities, there are different laws in those towns or cities that apply, and it's important to make sure that we are compliant, not just where you are, but where the employees are as well. Now, we can look at what's worked well in the past, and we can try to continue to use that so long as it's consistent with the law. And then we look at what has been problematic and how we can go about fixing it. And then we have to make sure that we have a process that's user-friendly. One of my concerns is, while this may be good from a lawyer standpoint, from an HR standpoint, or a department head standpoint, it doesn't work. We've got to make sure that we have a process that works for everybody. And then interdepartmental buy-in. It's not just something that HR likes, but the department heads have to follow it. Compliance has to follow it. If you've got other departments involved, they need to follow it. Okay, next slide. Right. One of the things that's real important is when you have an employer-employee relationship, from the point where a person first finds out about a job in this organization through their last day of employment, credibility matters. And it's real important that we don't make promises we can't keep. We have to draw a distinction between selling and representing what this position is all about. So let's take the first one. And we've got Jimmy Dugan, and he thinks he got hired to be the manager of a Major League Baseball team, and he thinks it's a men's team. In fact, he finds out he's going to be managing a women's team. Anybody can name the movie, send an email to me. Yes, League of Their Own. And yeah, I think it's important that you tell him you're going to be managing not what you expect to manage, but something very different. Then we've got a totally different area of life. Amanda, young whippersnapper, smart person in the fashion industry, and she thinks she's got the dream job working with Miranda Priestley. And she's told on the interview process, oh, Miranda, she's the nicest, sweetest, most gentle person you can ever work with. And if any of you ever saw, what's the movie? Yes, Devil Wears Prada. You would know that Miranda is a lot of things. Kind, gentle, sweet, and serene are not among them. Thank you, Tara, for suggesting that movie. And then we have really what this is all about, is we need to know whether we're, whatever our position in the company is, we need to know what's going on. So contrary to what Jack Nicholson said so eloquently when he played Colonel Nathan Jessup, you can handle the truth. Anybody can name that movie? It's A Few Good Men. Slide 9, please. So the first checklist would be, and we're going chronologically, we've got a job we want to fill, and we need to post for this position. So the first checklist is pre-interview, making sure we follow all the right steps. And the first one is the language must match the work being performed. Again, we don't want to have a misrepresentation like Jimmy Dugan had in that situation. We want to make sure a person knows what they're getting when they walk in the door. And then how are we advertising the position? Are we advertising the position in a way that gets the broadest possible pool of candidates, or are we being a little bit selective and we're only putting it into a certain pool, which is not good for the company, and it's not good from a legal standpoint because it can be perceived as trying to dismiss a certain pool of candidates. And that's been an issue that the EEOC has gone after in cases like Pepsi-Cola when it felt like they were eliminating potential candidates who were African American or Hispanic. What's the process we're using to screen the applicants before they come in? Is it a neutral process, or is there any opening for a bias in that process? The test for handling exclusionary language. There have been a bunch of cases where there's been things like lifting requirements. They have nothing to do with the job. A college education for a position where you don't need a college education, or a master's degree for a person who's going to be working in a file room, things along those lines. Is there exclusionary language that is going to eliminate a pool of candidates that belong to a certain protected class? And then finally, compensation. Very recently, we had an event in California, I believe it's called the Academy Awards, where there was an eloquent speech about the fact that there is still problems with pay for women in this country, and the statistics are really very alarming. So when you do analysis for compensation for the position, you've got to be careful that after that speech, you bet dollars to donuts there's going to be a lot of unfair pay cases brought by women, and they're called glass ceiling cases. Let's go to slide 10. Now we go into the interview process. We should have a checklist that includes who's going to be present for the interviews. There have been cases brought where people complain that there's an A team and a B team. The A team interviews the people they actually want to consider for the position. The B team is to go through the motion interviews. What are the questions that are going to be asked? There are tons of cases brought where the questions being asked are improper. There is no reason for them to be asked, but they are anyway. I defended a case a few years back in New York where questions were asked such as, are you single and married? And there were comments on the actual interview forms, things like pregnant, no, fat, no, ugly, no, married, no, single and sexy, hire her. Well, that case went to court. We've got to review the process. Promises made on an interview can be dangerous. Oh, you'll be a partner in 2 years. You'll be an owner of this business. You're going to be here for 10, 15 years. This is a job for life. Those kinds of promises sometimes create litigation. Be very careful not to make those kinds of promises. As I said before, draw a line between selling and boasting things that you can't produce. Be careful with that line. And also, it's a great opportunity to start to make it clear to the candidate, this is what a successful person in this position looks like. And that should be a theme throughout their employment. This is what a successful person in the position looks like. Start that on the interview. You know, don't sell them a bill of goods, sell them the reality. And if they like that reality, they're a good candidate. If they like a fantasy that's not reality, send them to Disney World. Now, training the interviewers. Checklist, have they been trained to make sure they're not asking those improper questions, to make sure that they understand what is your goal and your mission to ensure that you're compliant under all the laws, rules, and regs. There are a couple of other things that should be on the checklist. Some positions should have a contract. And, you know, this is something that you've got to examine at this point in the process. And then also, are you going to have a non-compete? This is the time where you talk about the non-competes. Let's go to slide 11. Well, you've decided who you're going to hire, and congratulations to the successful candidate. And now it's time to prepare the offer letter. You should have a checklist for the offer letter and make sure that the form is approved. The next thing we have is the I-9. Every now and then, I do have those moments where I talk about I-9s and I get blank stares from my companies I represent. We got to make sure we're doing the I-9s, and we have to make sure we're going through the proper paperwork and the process. Now, if you've got a computer payroll system, you've got any kind of computer system to track hours and compensation, now it's the time to make sure you're entering this into the system. You also want to confirm classification. Is the person exempt? If they're not exempt, make sure they're being paid for overtime. And then you've got to present them in the employee manual, have them sign that they've read the employee manual, and any other orientation paperwork that you have from the employee. Make sure you go through every one and make sure you've got a signed copy of all the different forms acknowledging receipt in your system. It's awfully important to make sure we're doing it and doing it right. And then check the training that's necessary for this person in their position in your company. So let's talk a bit about people management. It's something I think that's very important, and I think it's also important to have it as a theme throughout the process, including when you bring in people to train your employees. And I like to talk about George McFly, real nice, quiet, nerdy fellow from Back to the Future, and gets hired by a company called Just in Time. And his boss is Biff. You all remember the Biff character. Large, loud, and really a despicable kind of guy. I think the line was, make like a tree and get out of here. And you get a pop on the head, it's Leaf, you moron. But in any event, Biff, during the course of the Back to the Future movies, sexually harassed Lorraine, clearly bullied George, cheated on paperwork when he was in school, cheated on paperwork on the job. He's the kind of guy who demands somebody to work overtime without compensation. So why is Biff, in this example, acting as George McFly's boss? Simple. Biff is a great salesman. He can make a lot of money. He was the highest salesman on the team, so he gets promoted to becoming a supervisor. Sadly, a lot of companies are doing that, and it's dangerous. It's a mistake. You don't promote someone to be a supervisor because they're a good salesman. You promote them to be a supervisor because they're a good supervisor. And there's a big distinction in that. But it's something to please put in the back of your minds. So the next one, page 13, is the people management checklist. Make it clear what's expected of the employees. This is what success looks like. when people are supervisors, it's not just, well, we get the annual performance evaluation process over with and that's it. Have checklists in place to make sure that they're reporting on their employees on a regular basis, that it's a 12-month-a-year job, not the annual review. And if somebody's inamiable, and when they fill out performance evaluations, they're a threat to your company. It shouldn't be a surprise. You know, if, for example, on a performance evaluation, the person's not meeting expectations. We set the expectations, we make it clear, we make it consistent. The next thing is on the checklist, actually, it's walking the floor. Supervisors, HR, other executives have to get out of that tower and on the floor on a regular basis. It's real important that they do that. We should have toolkits on the checklist. Do these supervisors, do the managers have the toolkits to do their job well? And here's another thing to think about, and maybe you want to write this down. HR is a profit center when utilized properly, a profit center. Think about it. Number 14, we're going to get into the compensation and benefits area. And one of the areas where we do run into a lot of problem, and there's been some huge collective litigation, is when we aren't tracking benefits properly. First step is we make sure that we're tracking and reviewing every hour a person has worked. We understand the language in the plans that we have in the company, and we enforce those plans consistent with the federal, state, and local laws, that we aren't making mistakes in calling people contractors or employees. And that's actually going to be a topic for a program a week from today. I'll talk about it at the end of this program. But it's real important that we're doing that. And there are different strategies you can use for tracking time. One method is called the elapsed time method. And that elapsed time method credits an employee for a period of service if he is still employed at the end of that period. Second is the actual hours method. And this considers the hours that each employee works and or is entitled to payment for things such as vacation or sick leave, etc. And they must complete a certain specified number of hours in order to receive credit for the time period. And the third is called the equivalency method, which is basically a hybrid of the first two. These are things to consider as you draft your plans, and these are things to think about, analyze, kick around before you make decisions. Not rash decisions, but decisions that are carefully thought out. Page 15. There's also the question of whether employees are entitled to overtime or we have a risk of unpaid wages. And in addition to making sure we're tracking the hours, and by the way, whenever an employee is paid, we should make sure that we actually have a number of hours that they work during the pay period if they are not exempt from overtime. So for this checklist, title, salary, the definition of the work they're actually performing. Again, remember that distinction between what it says on paper and what it says in reality. We have to make sure we've got the right definition for that particular person, not the job, but the person. What are the responsibilities? And that goes into the test of whether or not a person is or is not exempt. What is our method for capturing hours? For example, if it's a factory, before or after you put your uniform on, before or after you park your car and you get to your actual location of work. If, for example, you've parked one place and the company provides transportation to another. What is the overtime policy? What are the records we're maintaining? And does the system we use work for our purposes and also for the purposes of our employees? Number 16, training. Because many of you have got different locations at different cities or different states, the requirements regarding training may vary in terms of what you need to train on and how often you need to train. So you need to have a checklist of what is required in each of your facilities. You should have a schedule in place already for 2015, and you should start thinking about 2016. Training, for example, under sexual harassment, hostile work environment, Family Medical Leave Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, what to do if there's a request for an accommodation, such as the interactive process. We need to train on that, and we also need to train our supervisors to know what to do when the complaint comes in so that they don't suffer from insert foot and mouth disease. Safety training, safety policies, and any other training that you need in your particular industry for compliance purposes. After you train, it's a good idea to review the training to see what worked and what did not work, and then update your modules so they're even better than next year. Number 17, timekeeping in your industry should have a second set of checklists, separate and apart from everything we talked about. How are we inputting in the system? What are we doing to make sure we're in compliance regarding, for example, New York has got a certain requirement for an earnings statement with each paycheck. Are we doing everything we need to do for those earnings statements? Every now and then we should do an audit to make sure that we are doing everything we need to do to be compliant. Double checking for overtime. What are our record retention policies? How are we preserving our documents? What are we going to do if there is a blizzard, a hurricane, or a fire, or something like that? What's our duplicity? What's our redundancy? Records when employees go out on leave, so we know how much they're entitled to receive while on their leave. When they need to come back to work by, are we sending the proper notices to them? Are the notices compliant? Ensure interaction with the benefits department because of things such as health insurance, a disability plan, a pension plan, et cetera, and also ensure that we're interacting with HR regarding things along the lines of leave and disparate treatment and retaliation, et cetera. Let's move to number 18. We do like to promote from within for certain positions in the company. What is the process? What's our checklist for that? Do we have specific policies? Are they set forth in our employee manuals or any other policy that's been disseminated to the employees? What's the criteria? Again, we don't want Biff being a supervisor of the salespeople. At least I hope we don't want that. What is the review and the selection process? Is it fair? What are we saying to the unsuccessful candidates who wanted that position? Do we have an old boy network? Again, glass ceiling. It's going to be a hot area, and we need to make sure as much as humanly possible that we don't run the risk of an old boy network claim being brought against us, that there's a glass ceiling that's going to dissuade women from being promoted in the company or any other protected class. And then when a person is promoted into the supervisory position, then we run into the whole issue with the person, i.e., we've got to train the person. Many states require that a person who becomes a supervisor is trained within a certain finite amount of time. Number 19, audit alert. Every now and then, there's a knock on the door, and it's an IRS agent, it's the U.S. Attorney's Office, it's the Department of Labor, and they come knocking on the door, and what they want to do is look at the records. Well, we can't fix the records once they've already come into the office. They've got to be ready. So the audit alert is, what are the records on this particular area? Who's got access to them? Who's got responsibility when the auditor comes knocking at the door? We've got record retention, record generation, and litigation holds. And it's real important that we make sure that we're thorough. And then we get to the next step in the process. Before we let a person go, we want to review why a manager wants a person to be let go. We want to look at the employee's file. We want to make sure we don't have any complaints or requests for accommodations, because that would trigger a potential claim of retaliation. Remember, retaliation is the #1 charge at the EEOC. Make sure there's no disparate treatment. Make sure that we don't have any situation where we've got statistics or patterns to this particular supervisor has an animus towards any one particular class. And then we get to termination. Before we let the person go, We've got to make sure that we're paying what they're entitled to receive at the time that their employment is terminated. We've got to review who's going to be present when the person is terminated, what's going to be said. Are we giving them the proper notices regarding benefits? We don't want to run into a situation where there's a claim under COBRA because we didn't provide notice for health insurance continuation. We want to make sure that the employee does not have access to log in remotely into the computer system. We get all our documents back from that employee. And then we also have to review what's going to be said in terms of references that are given when the person is looking for a new job. Those are important things to cover on the checklist. Then these are just core factors. But please make sure, and we'll go to slide 22 now, that when you create your checklist, don't just go by perhaps what you saw on the internet or what I told you in this program, because what I talked about is general. You need to make sure that what you have works for your company is consistent with the laws, state, local, and federal, is consistent with your goals, is consistent with your mission, and of course it's got to be user-friendly. You're certainly welcome to talk to me about the different things we covered during the program. You can call me, you can send an email to me. And now slide 23. I'm also inviting you to attend on Thursday, March 5th at 4 o'clock Eastern Time, where my colleague Steve Wilkes and I are going to be talking about your independent contractors are not who you think they are. Employee status matters. And we're going to go in depth into the importance of distinguishing between an independent contractor and employee and the benefits regarding either characterization and the risk associated with it. Thank you so much for attending the program today, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you, David, and thank you to everyone for attending this webinar. A recording will be available on the Wagner Law Group website very shortly, as well as the PowerPoint slides, and I know that there were a few people who asked questions as to whether or not you could get the slides. They will be on the website. If you wrote your question in the chat box, David will contact you, and if you have any questions, please get in touch with him. Thank you very much.